Okay, the basic idea here is to change how you're thinking about something as opposed to what you're thinking. So, for example, and this would be specifically changing something auditorily or visually. Auditorily meaning sound. So, for example, if you're everybody knows that if you're thinking, "Oh, I'm no good," you could change it to "I am good," But there's another way that you can change it besides changing what you're thinking. You can change how you're thinking it. So that would be change the tone of voice. You have a tone of voice in your head. You're hearing that statement in your head with a certain tone. You can change that tone. You can change the sound of the voice. You can make it louder or quieter in your head. You can have the voice coming from a different place. Most people have, when they hear the sound of a thought, it feels like it's in a certain place in your inside your head or behind your head or somewhere. It feels like if you had to name it, you could probably say, well, it seems like it's coming from this. So you can move that location, and often that will change how that statement or how that voice affects you. And you can do, and that's auditorily. And you can also do this kind of stuff visually. So you can envision, like a lot of people say you're afraid of flying. And you imagine that, you imagine going on this flight and the airplane, a wing falling off and you crashing, right? So that's a thought that you have. Now, one thing you can do is change what you're thinking, which would be like, I'm going to imagine flying there and landing safely. And that's got its own value. But here's a different way of altering your thoughts. You can imagine something changing, like something in the visual image changing. So, for example, you could make the image smaller in your mind's eye. You could alter the location of that image. If you're seeing it directly in front of you, when you imagine it in your mind's eye, you could imagine it behind you or to the side of you. You could imagine looking at it in a theater as opposed to looking at it in real life. So like with a frame around it. So it's got a size, and you can shrink that size, and you can turn it into a black and white picture. You can turn it into a still picture rather than a moving picture, and so on. So so this is all changing how you're thinking about something. And often when you change how you're thinking about it, it really alters how you feel about it, and the consequences, like the psychological consequences, and therefore the actions you take and the feelings you have about it. So that's the basic idea, changing how you're thinking about something rather than what you're thinking about. For example, you say you have an upcoming interview and you're nervous about it. You imagine being kind of grilled and on the spot. So these thoughts are already going through your mind, right? You don't have to do anything to have them come up all by themselves. When you least expect it, when you're going to sleep at night and you don't want to be even thinking about that, this thought comes up. Well, how does it come up? Does it come up as a auditory thought? Are you saying things to yourself? Are you imagining? Or are you doing both? Are you visualizing being there in front of the boss and feeling very small and sweating bullets and him kind of grilling you? Or do you imagine you blowing it and saying something really stupid and feeling terribly embarrassed? Well, you can alter those. You can just play with it. And everybody codes their inner experience in some way. And certain things will make a difference to you that might not make a difference to somebody else. So you can let that scene play out exactly how it's playing out in your head, only make it a black and white image and see if that changes anything. Make the whole image smaller and see if that changes anything. Make the size of you change in the picture. Make you really big and see if that changes how you feel when you're imagining being in the interview. You can change the location of it. Say you're imagining it in front of you, you can move it to the side. In other words, you don't have to be a victim of your own thoughts. You are the director. You can direct it. Most of the time we don't. You just don't even think about it. These thoughts come to you and you just accept them as they are, but you can alter. It's your mind. You can do whatever you want with it. When my son was way too young to be watching such things, he was over at a friend's house and he watched the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. And then after that, he was having these terrible nightmares of Freddy Krueger, who's, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of his face, but they had him made up in such a gruesome, strange, creepy way that he kept seeing Freddy Krueger's face in his nightmares, and it was creeping him out. And waking up in the middle of the night having a horrible nightmare. So we had him play with this. And we just had him alter. We just said, okay, can you see Freddy Krueger's face in your mind? He's like, yes. Okay, now make it start peeling. Make his face start just peeling. All the little, because he's got like all these little weird strands all over his face. Have those strands just start peeling and watch him melt into a little puddle. Okay, now see his face again. Now have his face move away from you, screaming. Okay, now see his face again. Have his face get flattened by a giant, like metal press. So he just squishes. Okay, now see his face again. Have it just burst into flames and burn up into a little crisp, and so on. Anyway, we just kept having to play with this. And his nightmares completely went away. Part of it, I think, is that he was no longer the victim. I think that makes a really big difference. Regardless of what it actually does to the images themselves or the sounds themselves, and the change that can have on your psychology, I think the fact that you have taken over control of this thing makes a difference by itself. I used to be really sensitive to criticism, and being a writer and then eventually a public speaker, I obviously needed to get over that. So I started experimenting with this. I had my wife think of a bunch of criticisms, and I just sat there and tried different things to see what I could do with them. And I had her tell me real criticisms. And we took about an hour, and I just imagined all kinds of things. Like, for example, I imagined being in a fort, surrounded by the guys from the movie Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger and his men guarding the outside of the fort. And I'm in this huge, thick-walled, impregnable fort, and I'm listening to these criticisms through a little microphone. Or actually, at one point, I imagined it coming across a teletype machine, so I wasn't actually even hearing it. So I wasn't hearing any tone of voice or anything. I was just getting the information. Then I imagined watching the scene dissociated, which is a visual technique that you can use. That is, it's basically looking at yourself from outside yourself. So, give you an example. What I mean by that is, let's say imagine yourself eating an ice cream. Okay, so see the ice cream in front of you, ice cream cone in front of you, right? And you see it coming up to your face and you're licking it, right? Now imagine being next to you, looking at you, eating an ice cream cone from the side. You can see it going up to your face and you're licking it, right? From outside. That's being dissociated. And that really often strongly changes how intense the feeling is from the image. So I imagined when I was doing this criticism process, I imagined that there was a security camera up in the corner of the room watching my wife and me sitting there and her criticizing me. So I'm watching it from the outside of me. It automatically makes it less painful and less emotionally impactful, right? So, and at another time I played with this, I imagined, how, if you ever saw the movie Iron Man, how his uniform sort of, or his outside shell sort of just formed, it crawled over his body and encased him in this thing. I imagined I I'm an Aries, so I imagine I had ram horns that just formed in these big, thick ram horns on either side of my head, and it made me feel more protected. And so when somebody started to criticize me, or when I started to read a criticism, I imagine these ram horns forming really quickly around me, and I felt safer, right? So these are just things, just ways of playing with what's going on in your mind, and a lot of times it really makes a difference. And that one really did, and that is a really good one to get over, dealing with criticism, so that you can. You don't want to block it out. Obviously, a lot of criticism is actually useful and has been very helpful to me, the criticisms I've gotten from people. But you don't want to block it out, and you don't want to run away from it, but you don't want to have it make you feel terrible either. You want the information, but you don't want it to just make you miserable, right? So you can play with these are called submodalities, by the way. I've gotten this from neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, which is a kind of system of psychology, and they call these submodalities. So they call the senses modalities. So you can visualize something as a visual modality, or auditory is sound, modality. There's also kinesthetic for your body. Olfactory, obviously, your smell, and taste, gustatory. So those are modalities. And what we're talking about here are submodalities. They're the fine details of that modality. Like volume would be an auditory submodality, auditory detail. A really good book, if you want to read about this, is Using Your Brain for a Change by Richard Bandler, one of the co-founders of NLP. But the idea is you just experiment with all these different ways. Try to think up all the different ways that you can change something visually or auditorily, and experiment and see what makes a difference to you. Location is usually an important one. Your brain naturally organizes itself using however it does. I mean, nobody really teaches us to do this stuff. We organize it in whatever way we do to code things. Like if it's important, it's over here, location-wise, in your mind. If it's the future, it's over there. A lot of people have, they'll have their future as kind of the future and the past, kind of like a timeline that's straight ahead of them and straight behind them, right? The way they think of the past is literally behind them, and the way they think about the future is straight in front of them. Some people do it left to right. It's a really common thing for people to think of the past as being to their left and the future as being to their right in their images, in their mental images. When they think about something in the future or visualize something that hasn't happened yet, they often look to their right. If they're trying to remember some past visual memory, they'll look to their left. That's just the way that they have naturally coded their brain. Because, you have to have some way of knowing what is what. How do you know that you have, when you're remembering something, how do you know that it's the future or the past? Your brain has to code it in some way so that you can organize your experience in some way. And location is often very important, both visually and auditorily. So a voice can come from beside you, behind you. It's often a really, really simple and easy thing to change, is the location of something. Just immediately try that when you're playing around with changing how you think about something. Is try location first and see if that doesn't make a difference, because a lot of times it makes a big difference. So say you're thinking some terrible thought about yourself. Let's say you're like, I'm such a loser, or I'm so clumsy, or whatever, and then imagine that voice coming from your big toe, right? Imagine the same thing, saying the same statement, but coming from a different location, and see if that doesn't change the emotional impact of those words to you. You're thinking all the time. You have lots of opportunities to alter this, to play with this, to experiment with it. One time I was feeling kind of discouraged about one of my goals, and I was out for a walk, and as I was walking along, I started imagining people that I know and that love me lining the on either side of the path I was walking on and singing to me. And I can't remember it was a gospel song, except I had them, the words were different, and they were singing to me something like, you can do it. We know you can. We believe in you. And it was just, I kept imagining as I was walking along, all the different people that I know singing that to me. And it really, really strongly changed my state. If this all kind of seems like a somewhat elaborate thing to do, you got to remember that you think all the time. And a lot of times what you think just seemingly just happens to you. This is doing is making it more deliberate, and hopefully making it turn out, making you have the results from your thoughts that you'd rather have, rather than just, thinking it however you think it, whether it helps you or not. So this is a really basic, simple thing to do that gives you more control over your own inner experience. Another way I've used this, and my niece uses this, my wife, is to simply go back into a nightmare and finish it right. Finish it the way you'd like to finish it. So you say you have you wake up from a nightmare and you're sweating, your heart's pounding or whatever. To think about it for a second, and then go back into the dream with, imagine that you kick a drawer and a weapon pops out, and you grab that and you take care of it, or you go back into the nightmare and you say, and you realize, and you hear the director say cut, and you realize the whole thing is a set. You're in a movie. Or you let's say you whistle and 5 of your friends show up and they're all armed to the teeth. You just go back into the dream and finish it the way you want it to end. And I hardly ever have nightmares. And I think that part of the reason is that I've taken control over this for a long time. I mean, I've been playing with this stuff for, 30 years. And I know for a fact that as small and easy as this is, the consequences can be really big. Stephen King, supposedly, according to Richard Bandler, the way Stephen King, the thriller writer, the horror writer, the way he motivates himself is he imagines, when he's sitting down at his computer to write, he imagines his voice coming down a tunnel behind him, and it comes right up behind him and screams, "Get to work!" I thought that was a really appropriate way for a horror author to to motivate himself. I had a long time ago, I had a friend was telling me he had a fear of talking to attractive women. And so, of course, I was like, well, what goes through your mind when you see an attractive woman? And he goes, well, I imagine her thinking to herself, what a dork. I was thinking, well, okay, now I understand why you would have a fear of talking to an attractive woman. So let's play with that. So that's it really helps if you're going to make an intervention like this on yourself or with somebody else, that you use what already happens and alter that. So what already happens is he imagines her thinking something. So I said, okay, imagine you see an attractive woman. Close your eyes and imagine this, the last attractive woman that you saw. Now imagine her being able to have telepathy and communicating with you in your head with her voice, I would like to get to know you. Okay. Then I had him open his eyes and think about something else for a second. I said, oh, now close your eyes and try to remember the time before that, another attractive woman. Okay. And see her in your mind's eye, and then have her voice being projected into your mind that says, I would like to get to know you. And we did this like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. And it completely solved his problem. It was such a simple intervention. And he said completely, the problem was over. He had no problem talking to attractive women anymore, and he's now married, and the problem essentially disappeared. And it took us all of, 4 minutes to do this thing. It's so simple, and the consequences can be so huge. It can change the whole course of your life. I knew a couple that they had been separated for 3 years. And during that time, he had sexual relations with a couple of women. And then they got back together. This couple got back together. And she could not get the images of him having sex with somebody out of her mind. She just couldn't do it. Every time they started to get intimate, those images popped up in her mind. She wasn't trying to do this. It wasn't being done on purpose by any means. She wished it wasn't happening, but it just happened. And I'm sure you could think of a lot of things she could do with that. She could alter those images. They're coming up naturally, right? She could have made them less clear and more fuzzy. She could have made it from a moving picture to a still picture. She could have, made the picture move to the side or away from her, changed the location of the picture. She could have made it brighter or dimmer, smaller, further away, whatever. There's so many things she could have done. I heard Richard Bandler talking about, somebody that had like images that were haunting him. He had him imagine the images were being projected on a big glass projector screen, and then just going up and smashing the picture with a sledgehammer, and then sweeping all this glass into molten glass and melting it. There's so many. It's infinite, really, what you could imagine doing with this picture. But instead, she's like everybody else. She just thinks her thought. She's just basically a victim of her own thoughts, and she couldn't take it anymore and left. So this has real consequences. The fact that we don't even think about changing how we're thinking about something has real consequences. My mom, for example, was diagnosed with cancer, and it was, they told her this is a very aggressive cancer and we can't treat it. And of course she was scared, and she was having nightmares, and she pleaded to me to help her. And I'm super glad I was actually able to help her. I told her, I said, okay, next time you're in a nightmare, just call out my name and I'll be there, and I'll bring our whole family with us. I'll be standing on one side of you, and my brother will be standing on the other side of you, and we won't let anything get to you. And your boyfriend will be there, and he'll have a weapon. He's a really good soldier, a very skilled soldier. And our cousin, I'm naming these people to her, our cousin will be there, and he'll have a weapon. He's a Marine. And our nephew will be there, and he is a weapon. He's a champion martial artist. And she laughed. She thought that was funny. And I said, we will surround you and will not let anything get to you. And you can tell whatever is threatening you that to get to me, you're going to have to come through my whole family. And she thought that was great. When I told her, she was like, oh, I like that, And I told her again the next day. I kind of went through that whole thing again and said, as soon as you feel like you're in a nightmare, you call out my name and we'll all come. And her nightmares stopped. And I don't think I've ever been as glad to know something. I urge you to play with this and to remember it. This is a really easy thing to forget. Remember that you have this power and use it. I urge you. This is Adam Lee Kahn on the Atom Bomb.